Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Just one second. I'm going to go ahead and bring in our guest from the backstage. Excellent. Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Welcome, everyone. My name is David Corsar, and I manage career development programs here at the National Wildlife Federation, including this year's EcoCareers Summit Series, along with support from the youth leadership team and the entire education and engagement department. Today, I would like to thank the hundreds of students, faculty, and professionals that are joining us from high schools, colleges, universities, and organizations all across the country and across the globe, all coming together to learn about rewarding green careers. We hope today's sessions will give you a sense of how to convert the knowledge you gain in classrooms and the skills you gain by working on sustainability projects into career skills as you hear from habitat and wildlife and climate conservation professionals in a range of roles. As you go along, please keep in mind three things. One, technology, please bear with us during any glitches. If you encounter an issue, please first try either refreshing the tab that you are joining, if joining via a browser, or closing and reopening Zoom if you're joining through the app. The second thing is interaction. Please take advantage of the chance to interact in the chat, in the Q&A, in the lobby. I saw lots of folks sharing their perspectives, their LinkedIn links in the lobby already. That's fantastic. Keep it up. The chat box is used to talk to us and to each other throughout the entire summit series. We really do encourage you to add your expertise and ideas to the conversation here, and use the Q&A box to send questions to our moderators, which will be asked to keynote speakers and panelists at the tail end of their sessions. And the third thing is National Wildlife Federation support. NWF is here to support you as you develop your leadership and career skills at each life stage, from pre-K through high school to entering the workforce to further academic goals and beyond. And we hope you will explore and take advantage of those programs. One resource that I would like to lift up today is our career planning workbook. If you are currently in a planning stage or transition stage for your own career, or if you counsel those who are planning their careers, we hope this resource may be useful to you all. There's a pinned message in the Zoom events lobby, but I'll also drop the link in the chat in a moment. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to introduce you to Hannah Wicks, who will be leading our first workshop. Hannah is an advisor on brand, marketing, and governance for tech and climate-focused startups and a career coach for individuals seeking to scale positive impact, particularly in climate and nature-focused careers. She was Chief Marketing Officer for EcoCareers, Germany's first B Corp, scaling the organization to 20 million users, I'm one, enabling the restoration of 100 million trees in 30 plus countries. She has held roles in business development and marketing at Trivago, working through their IPO launch. Prior to tech, she was a journalist for the ABC. Hannah is a Royal Society of Arts Fellow, advisor to creatives for climate and Europe's largest climate tech VC, World Fund. She also supports UK community foundations and the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants as a nonprofit board member. Hannah, thank you so much for joining. Feel free to kick things off.
Yeah, thank you so much. Always a bit intimidating when someone reads out a bio. You're probably going to get a few more details today around my career, actually, because I often use them as examples of how you can do career pivots, how you can explore new ideas or interest areas and grow your individual impact. So I'm Hannah. I'm actually coming to you from the Scottish Highlands, which is where I live most of the time. And I have moved around a fair chunk in my career, so that will be part of what I'm sharing today. So I've got some slides I'm going to share, but to kick it off, I know some of you have been in the chat as you're waiting to come in, but if you wanted to share where you're joining from and where you're at in your career. So are you in high school? Are you in college yet? Are you looking at postgrad? Are you advising students? I'm really interested to know where you're at in your career. And that will help me tailor some of my examples on the fly. So if you can add to the chat, that would be great. And if you can't add to the chat, let us know. Actually, I'm not sure how you would do that because I'm not seeing anything come in yet, but maybe.
I just changed the setting to allow that.
Okay,
It's
great. If you
coming in now.
posted or try to, please go ahead. And I will have a quick look at these as I get ready to share my slides. Okay, great. So we've got some career transition happening in there. Some people who've just graduated from their masters, college juniors. Okay, so lots of active job hunters and coming from all over the country. Great. Keep adding it in and I will go share my slides. Right. Okay. So I've titled today's session, and it's the opening workshop, Career Exploration. So what we're going to do is a little bit of what I actually do when I'm working with someone and doing one-on-one coaching with them. So some of the techniques I'll use to explore career paths, and I'm using plural intentionally because there's always more than one path that you can have when you're looking at nature, biodiversity, climate, or just having positive impact through your career in general. I work across a few different areas. So whether it's tech, and it's usually in climate tech or social impact tech that I'm most interested, sometimes directly in climate tech companies, sometimes in more climate nonprofits. There's a lot of intersection between that and philanthropy, or at least I discovered during my career. I was like, wait, where is the money coming from for this? So I now have moved a little bit into that space and support a few different foundations. My whole purpose is to try and help individuals scale their impact. And if they can do that and we can start doing that en masse, we start seeing quite a huge positive shift through people feeling empowered through their day-to-day work. I also love the piece of transformation. Like when you choose to actually go, I'm done with this career path. I'm going to try and pivot into this one instead. So that's always the space I'm most intrigued by. These slides should be up to date, but I've been pulling stuff from other presentations, so you might notice a couple of typos. I apologize in advance if that is the case. As David said, I worked for a few years as Chief Marketing Officer at EcoCareers, and this role was a fascinating one, and it was my first kind of on-paper climate role, but it was a long journey to get there. Some of you might use it. It's a search engine and it uses 100% of its profits, which is very ambitious when you consider some of the other things are more about 1% for the planet. EcoCareers' whole goal is to try and use 100%. It obviously has to cover expenses, including software engineers, which is not cheap, but it uses it to plant trees. So some of these little icons here are some of the regions where EcoCareers has planted trees. That role, we grew from when I joined around 3 million users were using the product, largely in Germany, where EcoCareers is headquartered, to around 20 million now around the world. I left in 2023. I'd hit a point where I was like, okay, I've had the impact I can here. What can I do next? And I wanted to work with multiple organizations rather than one. Hence my pivot into working as a coach and as an advisor. So I often work on board level in more of the governance piece of different organizations. So how to begin your pivot into an impact career, a nature-focused career, a climate career, they're all impact careers. So I'm going to use this term a bit during the presentation. The first question, and it would help if you can grab either a sheet of paper or if you're taking notes on your laptop, but I find paper is really great for when you're exploring stuff and have to think a little bit to the side. It would help if you had a bit of paper with you, but the first question is, what's your lived experience? And this is a question that often comes up a lot, and nonprofits use this phrase, lived experience. What have you experienced in your life today, not just in terms of work experience, that might be unique? And I'm going to use a couple of examples from my work experience or life here. One, I grew up in rural landscapes, in rural places. So I grew up in Devon, which is in the tiny tip of the UK. And I also grew up in regional Australia, so in the outback. Two very different environments. I had a parent from each, so it all does make sense. But in this case, what that meant is my lived experience related very much to landscapes where nature and farming were kind of prevalent. I understood that almost inherently, and I kind of took it for granted. I then had this in my lived experience. Because I grew up in regional Australia, and there's a few of you probably in the US as well with this experience, I got to grips with wildfires or bushfires, as we call them in Oz, very early on. So I remember being evacuated when I was 13, and they were very concerned that the fire was coming in, funneling down our valley. So we had to get out and grab what we could. It is a moment that sticks with you. And when it comes to a term like lived experience, this is what you're looking for. What are these moments where they're pretty acute? They're moments that are outliers in your experience, but they're there. And for me, this is probably where, and I was 13, I wasn't using the phrase climate change at that point in my life, but that's what I was experiencing. There had been a mismanagement of the natural landscape to the point that we were seeing wildfires that went well beyond what would be expected. So that was in my work experience or a life experience. The other question to ask yourself when you're exploring your career or where you could go to with your career is what hard skills have you picked up? This is an easier question once you've already embarked. So if you're a couple of years into a job, you can kind of start going, okay, I have this hard skill. I know I can set strategy, or I know I can look after a budget. For me, one of my hard skills was events. I worked in radio really early on, and that had come through an internship, and I worked in live music events and broadcast. And for me, I was kind of like, well, that's a part of my job. And it wasn't until I was working years later in tech that I realized actually not everyone knows how to run an event and how to do an outside broadcast and live media event. So when EcoCareers hit its 50 million tree mark, we hosted a live event. We invited the Minister for Environment. And I realized pretty quickly, I was like, oh, this skill set I have is completely transferable. So these are the kind of hard skills I'm talking about, things that you have from one job, and it might be the ability to know if you made a profit that day when you're closing up for the day at a hospitality business that you worked at when you were 15. That's a transferable skill. You might do it on a different scale, but it's still there. The other area I'd worked in was Trivago, and that happened pretty much because I moved to Europe and it was tough going to find a job. Uh, a lot of people didn't understand my work experience in the past in a different sector and in a different country. And I literally looked for roles that were actively hiring Australians. So I put that into the role description when I was searching. And Trivago was looking to expand, and they were looking for people within Germany who understood the Australian market. So I used in that case my regional understanding. So I took it for granted that I had that citizenship and that I understood that market, but it was applicable in a work context. So again, a kind of hard skill that was transferable, especially once I'd left that environment. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about Ecosia. What we're looking for here when I'm talking about these hard skills and the lived experience is career threads. This is one of my favorite artworks, and it's just called The Knot by Annie Albers. And this really doesn't make sense. Like, how do you follow these paths? How does it connect? And this is what your career can sometimes feel like. And there will be threads that maybe start really early on that make no sense and that you don't pick up until way later in your life. And that's something that we'll come back to today. So just something to keep in mind, that it might seem right now like a tangled kind of knot, but it all kind of starts to come together. So I want to jump us to an activity. So get that sheet of paper ready. How to identify your career threads and your impact focus. So if we can go back, I want you to reflect back to the first moment, similar to that moment, and it's a pretty extreme example, but of that wildfire. That was my moment probably when you first became aware of climate change, or when you first became aware of nature or wildlife. Is there something that stands out in your memory? Something that's maybe lurking in the back that you haven't connected to in the past and gone, wait, that's maybe why I ended up studying this, or why I have an interest in a biodiversity career, for example. This is a career thread. So if you can spend a moment, and we're just going to spend a couple of minutes on this, I want you to actually draw that experience. I'm going to try and think of a different one to the wildfire one. So get the paper out, a pen if you can. If you're working off your laptop or phone, then you can find a way to do it on the device. I want you to kind of draw it or describe it visually. What happened? What does it look like? Make it a bit of a dramatic drawing. And then once you've done that drawing, we're going to come back and add a few emotion words to that. But I'm going to give you a minute or so just to kind of draw that first experience of nature, that first experience of wildlife. So let's do that now. Okay, just finish up that drawing. It doesn't have to be good. Under this time pressure, I'm not imagining that we'll have great works of art, but okay. I have ended up, I'm not even going to show you it. I have done calls where I've shown my artwork, but mine is so bad this time. If you can look at that picture just for a second and think about what that experience or memory makes you feel. What are the kind of, how would you describe those emotions? Does it make you feel hopeful? Is there a sense of anxiety when you look at that? Just write down 3 to 5 words, emotion words that might relate to that image. Feel free to, if you want to add your words into the chat and share them. Thanks for doing that, Rosemary. I saw yours come in. Okay, so I want you to kind of move away from what you're thinking right now in terms of what you're applying for, what you're thinking of studying. Just put that to one side right now. Let's go back to that memory, that precise image you've drawn, whether it's a good or bad image, and what is it, something you could do right now that relates to that memory? What is something that you can do, whether it's a volunteer or in a paid capacity? What's a role that actually relates to that? I'm writing down ideas as we go. I've drilled into a completely different childhood memory that I had totally forgotten about. So each time you do this exercise, you actually kind of dredge up different experiences. Um, okay, so let's give that kind of piece of work a title. It's always the thing that takes sometimes the joy out of it. But what would that role be like on paper? Maybe you don't know the job title actually for that area of work. Okay, right. We're going to put that to one side for a second. Okay, so what you've created here is a career thread. Um, and that experience or that kind of area is a potential thread that you could pick up at another point in your career. It doesn't have to be now. It could be that thing that you've just kind of dredged up from your past actually could be something that you come back to in early retirement when you're like, I still want to be active, but I want to do something where I give back. Maybe it's something you activate then. It doesn't have to be right now. If you want to share what that thread might be, feel free to put that in the chat as well. Okay, so we've identified a career thread, but how do you follow up on that? How do you make that actually something that you can do for work and take more seriously? Okay, this is just a quick example of one. So I mentioned before that I grew up in this regional setting in Australia. It was when I was about 13, a place where the government kind of went, you know what, we're going to send refugees who are being taken into Australia to this regional town where I was living. So it was a very rural environment, and they decided to send Sudanese refugees into this very rural town. Um, and my dad started tutoring people in English. And he was like, "Do you want to come along?" And I was like, "Sure." Like anything to get out of like post school and going and having to do actual homework. So I had this kind of formative experience of doing refugee tutoring with a girl my age who'd had very, very wildly different experience to me. Most of her life she spent growing up in an Egyptian refugee camp. And that experience stuck with me. I didn't activate it in any way in a work capacity until I was in this role at Ecosia. I was enjoying it, but I needed something else. Like I was like, I need to be challenged in a different way. And the UK government, and I was living in Germany at the time, but the UK government started using rhetoric which had been used by the Australian government, very anti-immigration rhetoric. And I was like, wait, I've seen this before, and I now have expertise in communications and how to navigate communication challenges and how to get sympathy on different topics from media and different audiences. So this meant that I ended up reaching out to a charity, picking up that career thread, explaining my hard skills, which was more in the comms space, the marketing space, saying, hey, if you need help, I'm happy to come on board. So I ended up being a charity for the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, which is the UK's largest legal aid charity. And they're working on a project around climate. And I didn't know that when I reached out, but ended up working on climate migration and how to communicate that in a way that doesn't create almost pushback. So that is an example of a thread, and often this kind of lived experience that you have that can come back up at different points in your career. And that was one of my first kind of board roles, was working at this charity, a very full-on board role, to be honest, and learning about how to do charity governance and nonprofit governance. So I wanted to share that example because sometimes you just don't know where those formative experiences are going to land you. But the more that you're aware of what you've kind of experienced, your lived experience, the more likely you are to see opportunities as they arise. Okay, so identifying your impact focus, because one thing I see a lot when I coach people in this space, people who are wanting to move into climate, who maybe have been in the space for a while, but they're finding it's financially really tough. They might have been volunteering for a bit, and they're struggling to get into the space. You need to identify the impact you want to have. And my big, and I've made this as bold as it could be, you need to be really specific. You need to go beyond the catchment word, which might be climate, for example. Let's say you're interested in a climate career, and I have that a lot. People say, oh, I want to work in climate. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because there's so many different facets. And it's the same with I want to work in nature or wildlife, but what do you mean? And this is what I mean. This is, if you can say climate is great, and that's fine when you're networking, but people can't actually grasp onto it and introduce you to the right people. Can you go a little bit deeper on this? So can you go, wait, when you talk about climate, if you were to look at this, are you more interested in oceans, waterways, rivers, or are you more interested in land-based kind of nature activities in forests? Are you interested in climate action? So looking at activism. Are you looking at regenerative farming or agriculture? Are you more interested in the tech piece, energy? Is it really about biodiversity for you? Is it about built environment and urban landscapes? So climate manifests in quite a lot of different ways, and nature careers are the same. Um, Depending on where you live, you will have different opportunities for this as well. So that's something I think to be aware of. But my big piece of advice, if I go back one slide, be really specific. And you can have several of these, that's fine. You're like, I'm interested in regenerative agriculture, peatland restoration, and forests. They're probably my top picks. I also like climate tech. And I know a fair bit about it, but if I'm really honest, I love the nature-based solution space. So figure out, and you might need to do some research here, but it's going to make your job hunt and your networking a lot easier. Okay, another way to be specific is to look at something like the SDG goals. They're something that get thrown out all the time, but actually they are a really great way of splicing impact. So go, okay, wait, which ones appeal to me? Is it life below water? Am I interested in this? Am I really interested in that justice space? So reducing inequality. For me, is it about this clean water and sanitation, or am I more interested in affordable and clean energy? So that's a really good starting point for research, is to look at the SDGs, look at organizations and what they're saying they're addressing, because they often have this in their about section. That's a good research point. Another great resource, which I think a few of you, if you've been in the climate space for a while, will know, is something called Project Drawdown. They have a really great book and they have quite detailed reports on each area and how much carbon it can draw down. But this is a different way of looking at the impact. So figuring out your impact. Okay, so what are the opportunities? If we were to really look at land sinks for a while, that's how much carbon could be brought down. If we were to really look at ocean sinks, that's how much could be brought down. So that's another resource to look at if it's interesting. I'd see your question in there, Shelby. I totally agree. They are interwoven, and one of the challenges is there are very few organizations working across all of them. So actually figuring out for you personally, where do you want to get your interests in? And there might be several. You can then prioritize looking at those organizations, checking those job boards, interviewing and building your career and expertise in that space. That doesn't mean you can't pivot into another area later, but if you keep it to top level, you run the eternal risk of not hitting anything. So you have to jump down one and go, okay, what can I become almost an expert in? And you can be passionate across topics. That can often work if you want a kind of more climate activism career, but generally I find even the activists specialize. So figuring out where to kind of push makes a lot of sense. Okay, this one, I'm actually gonna, I want you to note down this question. We're not gonna stop down in the interest of time, but imagine if like people's perceptions didn't kind of matter, if you weren't facing that challenge around, okay, I've got to pay the bills. I've got to kind of show people that, I did this master's and it's actually going to pay off. Um, Pull that away. If you could work on any impact solution, what would you be working on? If you could basically win a huge grant and go in and start working on that solution or that big challenge, what would it be? It might not be something you can activate right now, but it's always good to ask yourself this. What would you be doing if those kind of material considerations were out of the way? If you know it already, feel free to put it on the chat. If you need to spend a bit of time reflecting on this, feel free to note it down. Okay, work values. So some of you will have done, oh, there's some coming in, wetland restoration. I love that one. I'm going on a peatland course soon, so looking at restoring peatland, which holds huge amounts of carbon. Okay, how to define your work values. So values mapping activities, some of you might have done this before. But when you're looking at values, you need to look back at your past work experiences. And I've already shown these images, but what did you like about that role? What connected with you? So I loved working with people when I worked in radio. It was huge audiences. When I was at Trivago, that part for me was about new experiences. I really loved the travel element of the role, of experiencing different cultures, of working across different markets. These kind of past work experiences are hinting at values. So this activity I would like to spend a little moment on. We're going to travel back to some past work experiences and figure out your work values. So let's pull out, it can sometimes be a really early career like job. So pull out the thing that you maybe did, when you were 16. It doesn't have to be something that you're doing later in life. What did you like about that work experience? Was there people engagement? What did it look like? If you can write that down, so just pull out a past kind of work that you've done. If you don't have a work experience to draw on, feel free to pull out maybe a project you've worked on, a volunteer piece you've done. Just note it down. I was a Santa elf for one job, doing photos of kids with Santa, so I'm going to use that for this activity. So it doesn't have to be something too serious. What did you like about it? Just note down on your sheet of paper. Okay, and what didn't you like about it? 2 to 3 things that kind of stand out that were like, oh, it was so frustrating when. What was that thing that you didn't, that really made it kind of maybe why you're not doing that job now? If you've written down, and I find when I do this activity with clients, they often write down their boss. Um, Go one level down. What was it about that boss? Were they not very authentic when they communicated, saying one thing to you and another thing to the team? Were they um, quite stressful in the way they managed? Write down what it was more specifically. Okay. And from those negative words, there's often an opposite to a negative word. So if it was that your boss was inauthentic, the opposite of that is authenticity. And this is a value. This is something that might matter to you. It might matter to you more than other people. Okay. So what you've got on that sheet of paper, hopefully, is some starting to shape up some values, some words which kind of link to how you like to do work. I'm interested in hearing some of the words that came up for you. I'm going to put in a couple into the chat about my Santa job. And just put them in as example values. Yeah, some are starting to come in. So we've got honesty, connection, collaboration, open door policy. These are things that probably matter to you and will continue to matter to you no matter what sector or career you're in. One thing I do find is we often don't have huge self-knowledge on these. But you can have the best job, your dream career, you're working as a ranger in, I don't know, is there a you will all know this better than me, but there's a national park on Hawaii looking after the volcanoes. Like you could have that job being the ranger there and you love it. But if the culture's not quite right and you've got a clash, maybe the teamwork doesn't gel, maybe you don't have autonomy and you're being micromanaged. You can have the dream job, but if your values are at odds with that, you're going to hit a real wall and you will only last so long, in my experience, before you need to start looking for something else. So values are really important, sometimes more important than the impact of your work. Okay, so this is I just wanted to show a quick screenshot. This is often how I work with people on values. There's a lot. This yellow piece here, that's all the different words, is around 100 that we kind of sift through. The goal is to get to around 5 or 6 values, and they kind of operate like a bit of a values tent. And if one's out of alignment and you're meeting all of them, but your creativity value is not being met at work, you either need to meet it somewhere else, or find a way to incorporate it into your role. And you can ignore it for a while. And creativity for me is one that I tend to override, but it will lead to kind of a diminishment in work fulfillment. So acknowledging the values, filtering them up is really important. Okay. So what we've been doing for this first half hour is really quite esoteric, top line. What are my values? What's the impact I want to have? How am I going to go about this? What's in my lived experience? It's all great. The challenge is, how do you actually get a job? How do you actually get the work that you want to do? How do you find it and make it sustainable? This is what this next section is going to look at. So, how to get the wheels on a new career. Firstly, step one, where do you find the jobs? This is a big question. My number one recommendation here, and there will be a session I think later in the conference on networking. So that is a big recommendation. But my other one is use specialist job boards. So a lot of people know about Indeed or even LinkedIn, and they're great as platforms, but everyone's on them. There's a lot of jobs to filter through, and often the specialist jobs aren't there. The specialist jobs are often on very select job boards focused on different areas. So I've chosen a few that might be relevant in here. Good food jobs, that also includes focus on regenerative agriculture. Green Jobs Board, they often look at bigger nonprofits and climate tech companies. 80,000 hours, that's coming from the effective altruism movement, and they have a lot of roles. You can see over 700 roles live at the moment. And then Climate Based has a lot of more global nature and climate roles. There's quite a lot in there that are specialist ones. I'm going to put, let me just, I feel like this is important. There is a job board that I use. Let me see if I can share it. While I'm getting this up, if you have a job board that you use regularly and feel like sharing that with the group, feel free to. I am just going to find a really important link for you. This is my job board guide. So feel free to save that. And it's all the specialist job boards that I often use when I'm working with someone. And they're important. Like if you can start checking those regularly, I think your chances of finding roles goes up. You can obviously check companies as well and see what they're posting, but that can take time. So having a few trusted job boards can be really important. Okay, let me go back to presenting. Cool. Okay, so that's number one, use specialist job boards. Number two, how do you this challenge that you have quite frequently? Oh, wait, I'm going back. How do you overcome the experience requirements? And if some of you are at the earlier stage of your career, or if you're navigating a bit of a career change, this is one of the hardest chicken and egg scenarios out there. This is some screenshots I got yesterday when I was looking for this presentation. Okay, they want 3+ years experience in offshore wind, including experience in regulation, industry, or consultancy, maybe also a master's in biology. It's basically a wish list we're looking at here. This one wants 5 years in facilities and management and ops. They'd love you to have been in a confined community, like a field camp or aboard a ship, or a remote field station. This one here would love you to have experience, and this is looking at how we can improve fishing. They'd love you to have experience in that already, though it is an operations role, a general operations role. This one wants 5 to 7 years experience in philanthropy, in climate, ideally. As I'm probably not pointing out anything you don't know already. It can be a real challenge. What do you do when you don't have 5+ years experience? Okay, so my first recommendation, and the earlier you start this, the better, is volunteering and mini jobs. So some people do volunteering more like internships, which is great. And you maybe do a sprint for 2 weeks and you volunteer at this organization. What's better for your CV and actually more sustainable, probably work-wise, is to do 1 day or an hour a week. Maybe if you can do a morning a week, morning every 2 weeks, that's going to be better, and do that over a period of 3 months or 6 months. And that will look like a longer period of time on your CV than if you do it for 2 weeks. You also get to be a little bit more embedded in the team and experience more projects as they come up. So if there's a way that you can push for that when you do volunteering, it can be a lot more effective. And also look for volunteer days, so one-off days at local nonprofits. That can really build up the number of organizations that you have a network with. Another example is volunteering over while you're studying over a certain period of time. I did this one when I was working at the ABC. So I started, I think I had 2 weeks. They gave me 2 weeks on the internship, and I was like, can I just come back one afternoon a week after that? And I asked the program team directly, and they were like, sure, that's fine. And I was able to swing it straight after classes to get that little wedge of time in to be able to be there. Another example of that is reach out during crunch times to the organization. You might have volunteered with them 2 years ago, but if you can reach out and say, hey, I know the holidays are coming up soon. If you need any support or staff cover, I actually have some free time. If you can make that happen, and there is an element of privilege, I acknowledge in doing this, but if you can find a way to kind of fill the gaps where they need it filled, it can open up. I did that with the ABC and ended up with a 6-month contract because someone had had a bike accident. So doing these occasional check-ins and reminding them that you're there, it is a lot easier to apply and end up with a job at an organization you've already volunteered at. Your odds are just so much stronger. You've already proven that you understand the ins and outs of how they work. You already know a little bit about the sector, and often the staff will vouch for you as a reference, whether it's formal or informal. I was looking for a role when I left Australia, and I ended up volunteering at this bird charity called the RSPB. In the UK, it's one of the biggest membership charities for wildlife. After the National Trust, I think it's number 2. And I just did it like 1 day a week for 3 months. And then I went and ended up working in tech. But this was the role that ended up being the proof point that I cared about climate when I came to apply for EcoCareers. Because up to that point, I hadn't had any hands-on paid work in climate or nature. So sometimes you do a piece of volunteering, you're like, well, that was nice, but it didn't help my career path. Sometimes you just haven't harvested it yet. And I know that's kind of gross wording, but it can take a while before the volunteering comes through and helps out your career. The other thing of like how to get your foot in the door and get that essential experience is to consider applying to join a nonprofit board. Often people hold on this because they're like, I'm not senior enough, I don't know enough about this. However, transferable skills are truly valuable. So if you have background in comms, in managing people, if you've worked even just volunteer fundraising, doing fundraising drives, they're all relevant skills. Boards often also have underrepresentation of young people on boards. So you might be one of the only 1 or 2 people applying for that board role who is under the age of 50. So if you can apply and be in the running and do a good application, but acknowledge that you probably don't have the experience of the others, that can still open up. So my advice here is if you can put your hat in the ring, and if you, with these, your first board role, go for something local, go for a local nonprofit working on wildlife, working in climate, maybe a food co-op. I'm working with one client right now, and that was her path to her first kind of board role. And it's opened up another job interview already through that networking. So if you can apply, reach out, see how it goes. These are 2 which I ended up just almost cold applying for after I was interested in their topics. It's a really interesting one, particularly as you kind of are in your first or second role. Okay. Okay, the other piece, testing a career path. So how do you test if you're actually going to like the job when you haven't done the job? The easiest ways to test that are going to cost you the least amount of time, prototype conversations. So chatting with people who already do that role. So connecting with them either at a conference or via LinkedIn or an event and saying, hey, how do you like your job? What's the best bits? What's the worst bits? Just being curious, not saying necessarily, can you get me a job, but asking about what their work is actually like. It's often quite a memorable conversation. Not everyone asks those kind of questions, so it can really open up doors and make it a positive networking experience. Online events and in-person meetings, going to kind of the sector conferences, super helpful. I find podcasts can get you up to speed super quickly on a sector. Listen to podcasts, specialist podcasts from that area. So if you're interested in forestry management, and tropical forestry, literally put that into your podcast app and see who's done recent podcasts on it. Have a listen, see who they are, see how they talk about their work. It can really open up insights that would actually take you maybe a whole year of working there to kind of get up to speed on. We've already covered volunteering. There's always short courses. If you're in a role, you can sometimes ask for internal job rotations into another area. So if there's a climate team and you're sitting in the operations team, see if you can do a kind of 3-month placement or do a 1 day a week with that team. I have someone I was working with who was in the Google team and recently looked at that as a way of transitioning into climate. So you can kind of flex a little bit once you're internally inside an organization as well. Okay, the hardest way or the most time-intensive way of testing a new career path, doing a master's degree. While it can really open up doors, it is expensive and it takes a lot of time. So if you can test before you go down that path, it's always good. Another way to test, but it takes time, is job applications. So realizing along the way during interviews that you actually don't want this role. So applying for the roles and then figuring out that you don't want it can take several months before. So always to kind of do your scoping before. Okay, this is something that I'm borrowing from tech. And it's something to think about when you're looking at careers. What's your minimum viable product? How do you literally get the wheels on your career? So how would you go about building a car? It's no use to you if you only have wheels. It's not a vehicle. Um, it's no use to you if it doesn't have a steering wheel. On the flip side, what about if you followed a process like this, where you start with the skateboard, you then make it into a scooter, then the bike, then the motorbike with an engine, and then an actual car. So each step along the way, you've got kind of a minimal viable product. So it's a slightly different approach to building a career. Okay, so what I would advise you to do, and again, in the interest of time, I'm going to take this one out and it's an exercise for later, but take a career path, your dream career path that you have open, and write down the job title. Okay, I want to be a head of sustainability at B Corp. Great, that's a great path. Okay, but what does the skateboard version of that career look like? What does the scooter version look like? What's the motorbike version look like? So maybe the first version is looking like, okay, I'm working in the finance team as an assistant, but supporting the sustainability manager. So you've got that first job in the door and you're doing half a day a week somewhere else. That's the skateboard version. It might also be that the skateboard version is doing a volunteering alongside your day job. It might be that it's doing a taster course to kind of get the skills. The first version, what's your viable version? Okay, so some of you are probably like, wait, but I actually do want to study in this area. And studying and getting accreditation can really open up a kind of expertise and signal expertise. So there's two ways I would recommend. One is never forget the short courses. And there's a lot of short courses out there, like the Terra Do course that give you a broad overview of climate. But there's also some that are really good indicators of different areas. So the UN, for example, has really good short courses around human rights, nature-based solutions. They literally take a couple of hours, but they can be a really good signal on your LinkedIn, on your CV, that you're interested or specialist in this area. CFA, that is an exam that you need to pass. That's a finance exam, but looking specifically at climate and investing. They have one also on sustainable investing. If you're interested in moving into the finance space, like nature-based capital, for example, going down that path and doing an accreditation can really open up doors. Some of the big universities, rather than doing a master's with somewhere like Yale or London School of Economics, you can sometimes do a short 6 to 8 week course focused on a specific area. That can really help pivot, especially if you've gone down the path of one role and you want to go over here. So one of these are significantly reduced costs, but it does start to signal, hey, I'm interested in policy and advocacy. Okay, postgraduate degrees, also an option. These are a few that I will kind of highlight because they're more flexible, sometimes cheaper fees. If you are really worried about the costs of doing this postgrad, I would consider looking at like online UK courses, which are maybe about a third of the cost of US postgraduate courses. Some have dual programs as well, so you get more value from those. So an MBA and a Master of Climate Solutions. I've worked with people who've been applying for that course as well. Some of the online ones can be done around work, especially if you take a part-time option. So they can really open up the path of doing a bit of a career pivot. Right. How do I make career planning more resilient? So this is the part that is the bit I would most want you to remember. Um, you should have more than one plan. You should have more than one track. Think of it like a railway line and imagine that that line is going and it only has one track. If a tree falls on that line, the train cannot run and all the trains behind it cannot run. Everything, all that transport grinds to a halt. However, if you have a track that the train can switch to, you can go right ahead. It doesn't slow you down. Yes, you might go a little bit out of your way, but this is why you have more than one track. And it should be the same with our careers. And for too long, we've been taught, hey, I've got to climb a career ladder. And it's this idea of a one track linear path. And you will be more resilient, both mentally and also in terms of the opportunities that open up for you if you have ideally 2, 3 paths. Okay. So track one, this is how I like to think about track one. Track one, it should be the current path that you're on, the idea that you have, the thing that you're currently doing or that you're moving into quite aggressively through your degree and your focus. It's the most obvious path forward. That's your track one. Now, I want you to think more long term about it. Where will this take you in 5 years? What does that look like? How do you open that up? What's the role after the dream role? And also to sit with it. How do you actually feel about this? How motivated do you feel about the work? What are the emotions sitting around this role for you? So that's track one. It's the most obvious. It's what most of us spend our career and time focused on. You can map it out. I said map it out for 5 years. You can get a sheet of paper and do something called Odyssey mapping. There's a book called Designing Your Work Life that I would really recommend. And that's how you can Odyssey map. And it is, yeah, it's also a course and it's really great. Oh, wait, maybe they were in the chat talking about something else. Okay, you start visualizing. What does it look like if you do that role? Where do you go from there? Track two, though, is where it starts to get interesting. So track two, imagine that the first path is no longer possible. Overnight, the sector or industry collapsed. I've been working with a few different people or having conversations with people who have found this with government-focused careers in impact. Overnight, the whole sector shifted. So what do you do instead? Where can you transfer your skills? What other areas of impact interest you? And what if that went really well? What if it wasn't as difficult as you imagined it might be? What would it look like? Again, map it for 5 years. So take it seriously. It's sometimes really, because we think there's less chance of success on the backup plan, we don't think about what would follow after the first step. So that's the most important piece. Track two, importantly, and David, I am conscious of the time. I can see you smiling at me. We should be good, I think, or I'll wrap up soon. Track two, importantly, can be unfolding while you're on track one. So make sure that you've got, okay, this path happening, but maybe you're exploring this other option. For me, it can sometimes be that you do a bit of a pivot. For me, it was going, okay, I've been working in radio for a while. I'm shifting to Germany. I don't speak German. The pivot is social media. It's kind of a similar thing to radio. It's just a different medium. So kind of going, okay, that's my track two, entering a social media career path. What do I want to do after social media? Probably more marketing generally. And that opened up that other 5-year path for me. Okay, so this is what you should do. And finally, and we'll end on this, track three. This is your wild card. This is what you do when you're not thinking about the money, when people's opinions don't matter. Imagine there's a fairy godmother waving a wand and makes this happen. What's this path for you? What would you be doing? Spend some time describing it to yourself. What would your life look like? Would it look quite different? Would you be even going into an office? What is that? If you can do that, play the wild card. Often these things are more creative career pivots. And the thing is, this will happen to us. Most of us, I think there was an Indeed study that came out recently, and 2/3 of people job hunting also chose to do a career pivot at the same time. So the wild card is very much an option, and it kind of has to be for all of us. And I'll probably just end on this because this is a currently live in motion version for me. So I just went against my own advice and started a master's in history and archaeology. So it's always been a wild card for me. What if I studied this? What if I took it seriously? And so I did my first dig last week, and it's already related to climate and how we preserve historic sites. So this is an example of a wild card and bringing it in and taking it seriously and going, hang on, what if that was a thing that I could do? So that's probably my number one encouragement is opening that up, seeing if there's a wild card and interest passion that you have that you can bring to life. I have one client who started a Brazilian cake shop in Berlin after working for a food tech company. And so there's different wildcard pivots that you can do. Okay, I will end it there. If there's any questions, I'm happy to kind of answer along the way. I'm also up for connecting if anyone wants to connect and have a chat about careers, particularly in climate. It's not the easiest environment in nature and climate to get involved. So you have all my good luck and encouragement. But we do need you there, even if there's currently not a lot of enthusiasm coming from government and institutions. But yes, I'll put my link in the chat so we can connect a little bit more.
Hannah, thank you so much for this workshop. So many great resources, tools, activities. I also went through them as you were presenting them, and it was a completely different examples from the last time that I was lucky enough to attend one of your workshops. So I just want to thank you again for participating today.
Thank you so much.
Everyone connect with Hannah, follow her on LinkedIn. And we are about to start our next session pretty much immediately. So I'm going to close out this workshop. And if you go into the lobby, you'll find a link to join the next session, which is our keynote address. Hannah, again, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining, everyone. Talk soon.